$4,000 a month. That's what people pay to live in the Tenderloin, a 50-block area right in the heart of San Francisco. And for that price, you don't get luxury. You get a studio apartment where you wake up to screaming, sirens that never stop, and unconscious bodies blocking your building entrance. Let me put this in perspective. $4,000 a month is more than most mortgage payments in entire American cities. But in the Tenderloin, it buys you a front row seat to what residents call a war zone. According to Zillow and Rent Cafe data from 2025, studios in this neighborhood range from $2,695 to $4,500. The higher end, those are the renovated units with a private bathroom. That's the upgrade here, having your own bathroom. The Tenderloin sits between Union Square, where tourists shop, and City Hall, where politicians work. It's surrounded by money. Nob Hill apartments to the north go for over $5,000 a month. The tech offices in Mid-Market employ thousands. But right in the middle, you've got this. The city collects 5 to 10 emergency calls for overdoses every single day just in this neighborhood. The Department of Public Works picks up 100,000 used syringes annually. Think about that number, 100,000. That's not over a decade. That's every year. And that's just what they find and collect. Around 30,000 people actually live here. Not just homeless individuals or addicts, actual residents with leases, families. And here's the part that hits different. 3,500 of those residents are children. The Tenderloin has the highest density of kids in the entire Bay Area. More children per block than anywhere else around San Francisco. These kids walk to school past bodies, past open drug use, past dealers who operate like they're running a legitimate storefront business. A citizen count in 2024 documented 554 homeless people without tents, plus 65 tents set up on the streets. In one single walkthrough, researchers counted 42 visible dealers actively working. Not hiding, just out there. A housekeeper with 2 kids reported seeing users injecting or smoking drugs right in front of her building entrance every single morning. So why do people pay these prices to live here? The brutal answer is they have no choice. San Francisco needs 80,000 more housing units just to meet demand. The city is in a housing crisis that makes even dangerous neighborhoods expensive. These residents are mostly immigrants, Asian, Latino, Honduran communities. They're low-income families who work in the service industry, in tourism, and cleaning jobs around Mid-Market and downtown. They need to be close to work because commuting from outside the city would cost just as much. A lot of the buildings here are SROs, single-room occupancy hotels. They were originally designed back in the 72nds and 82nds for addiction, rehabilitation, and the LGBTQ community. These buildings are protected as historic properties. The zoning laws prevent developers from tearing them down and building high-rises. That resistance to gentrification keeps property values artificially low, but doesn't help renters. Landlords still charge market rates because they can. The demand is there. And while the average rent across San Francisco is around $4,500, you'd think the Tenderloin would be cheaper because of, everything. But it's not. Because cheaper in SF still means expensive anywhere else. In neighborhoods like Nob Hill, considered safe and desirable, you're paying $5,000 and up. So the Tenderloin becomes the affordable option for people who can't compete for those apartments. But here's what really gets me. The people paying $4,000 to barely survive in this neighborhood are living right next to people who make that amount in a week. Because while families scrape together rent, there are individuals operating a few feet away who pull in $350,000 a year. And that money, it's not staying in San Francisco. It's building mansions thousands of miles away in places most people have never heard of. Asterisk, asterisk. Foreshadowing. And those mansions, they've got something you wouldn't expect. San Francisco 49ers logos on the gates, Golden State Warriors flags hanging from balconies. Because the people making that $350K aren't spending it here. They're sending it home, transforming entire villages in Honduras into monuments built on American addiction. But we'll get to that. Asterisk, asterisk. So let's talk about who's actually making that money. Because this isn't some underground operation that's hard to track. The dealers in the Tenderloin work in the open, on specific blocks, and law enforcement knows exactly who they are. The question is whether anyone can actually stop it. The neighborhood has a nickname among the people who work there, the $1 Million Mile. And it's not an exaggeration. Successful dealers operating the Tenderloin can make up to $350,000 a year. To put that in perspective, a senior engineer at Google in San Francisco makes around $211,000 base salary. The people selling fentanyl on Eddy Street, Ellis Street, and Jones Street are out-earning tech workers in the most expensive city in America. Since 2020, Honduran dealers have controlled about 80% of the open-air drug market in this area. This isn't speculation. It's documented through arrests, court cases, and interviews. The main products are fentanyl, methamphetamine, and heroin. But fentanyl dominates because of its potency and profit margins. Between 2023 and 2024, there were over 3,000 arrests for drug trafficking in the Tenderloin and the neighboring Soma district. In just 18 days during 2020, police made 69 arrests. The San Francisco Police Department, working with the California Highway Patrol and even the National Guard, confiscated 200 kilograms of narcotics in that same 2023 to 2024 period. That includes 56 kilograms of fentanyl alone. The CHP and National Guard seized another 103 kilograms in 2023. These numbers show the scale. This isn't small time. The supply chain runs directly from Mexican cartels, specifically the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels, down through the border into California, and then distributed on these streets by Honduran migrants who've built an entire network. The structure works like this. There's what people call the OG, the original guy who came to San Francisco back in the 90 seconds and figured out the system. He established the route, the connections, the safe spots to operate. Then he brought family. Then those family members brought friends. Then those friends brought people from their villages. It snowballed. One successful dealer creates a pipeline for 10 more. And look, not everyone in this operation is making $350K. That's the top tier. Plenty of people at the bottom of this hierarchy are just trying to cover basic needs, maybe sending a couple $100 home. But the successful ones, the ones who've been doing this for years and know how to avoid serious charges, they're building wealth that changes entire communities back home. Since 2022 alone, more than 200 Honduran migrants have been charged with drug dealing in San Francisco. That's just the ones who got caught and prosecuted. The actual number operating is way higher, as that citizen count of 42 visible dealers in one walkthrough shows. So why San Francisco specifically? The city's sanctuary policies make it harder to immediately deport someone even after an arrest. That's not a political statement, it's just how the system works here. Public defenders actively represent undocumented dealers. There's even been proposals for a special court just to handle cases involving migrant dealers. The goal is to keep people from being deported over minor offenses, but the reality is it creates an environment where the risk is lower than in other cities. Then there's what happened post-pandemic. COVID emptied out the office buildings around Mid-Market and the financial district. Foot traffic disappeared. Legitimate businesses closed. And in that vacuum, the drug market expanded because there was less casual surveillance, fewer people around to report activity. By the time workers started coming back, the dealers were already entrenched. There's also this concept that came up in a 2024 lawsuit filed by residents and hotel owners. They call it a containment zone. The accusation is that the city deliberately allows drug activity to concentrate in the Tenderloin to keep it away from wealthier neighborhoods and tourist areas. Basically, sacrificing these 50 blocks so the rest of San Francisco can pretend the problem doesn't exist. Whether that's intentional policy or just the result of limited resources and difficult choices, the effect is the same. Dealers operate openly, arrests happen, people get released. New dealers replace the ones who got caught, and the cycle continues while families trying to live normal lives are stuck in the middle of it all. The San Francisco Chronicle spent 18 months investigating where all that drug money actually goes. Two reporters, Megan Cassidy and photographer Gabrielle Lurie, conducted over 100 interviews and reviewed thousands of court cases. What they found was something nobody expected. They started by asking every dealer they encountered a simple question, "Where are you from?" And they kept getting the same answer. Not just Honduras, but specific villages within a cluster of rural communities called the Syria Valley. One village kept coming up, then another, then another. The reporters looked at each other and said, "What have we stumbled upon here?" So they went there. They took 2 trips to Honduras, one for 8 days and another for 5. They drove on dirt roads for over an hour into areas without cell service, asking locals for directions to find the families of people they'd interviewed in San Francisco. And what they found left them speechless. The first thing they noticed were the symbols. A San Francisco Giants bumper sticker on a gate, a Golden State Warriors flag hanging from a balcony, someone wearing a Warriors t-shirt in the middle of rural Honduras. Then they saw it on the houses themselves. A Giants logo built into the iron gate of a mansion, a Golden Gate Bridge design on the facade of another house. These weren't subtle nods to California, these were declarations. Gabrielle, the photographer, remembers seeing one particular house and just saying out loud, "What have we stumbled upon here?" Because these weren't normal homes for rural Honduras. These were massive mansions, multi-story buildings with modern architecture, expensive finishes, and designs that would fit in wealthy neighborhoods anywhere in the world. And they were being built specifically with money from drug sales in San Francisco. The contrast was extreme. Most of the Syria Valley used to be farmland. Some areas still are. But now, scattered among the agricultural plots and modest homes, you've got these mansions that stick out like monuments. The locals know exactly where the money comes from. It's not a secret. In their interviews, the Chronicle talked to over 200 Honduran migrants who either currently sell drugs or used to. That includes a mother who spoke to them from prison about her role in a family-run fentanyl dealing operation. The Chronicle's review of court cases showed a clear financial trail. Money earned on the streets of San Francisco, sent through wire transfers or carried physically back to Honduras, and then used to purchase land and build these houses. One person makes it big in the Tenderloin, sends money home, builds a mansion, and suddenly everyone in the village knows there's an opportunity in California. That's how the network grows. It's not a cartel recruiting people, it's social. One person comes to San Francisco, figures out how to make money selling drugs, and tells family back home. Those family members tell friends. Those friends tell neighbors. It creates a migration chain where people from these specific villages know exactly where to go and who to contact when they arrive. And here's the thing. Most Hondurans who come to the United States find legal work. They get jobs in construction, restaurants, cleaning services. They work hard and send money home to support their families. But the ones who end up in the drug trade send back amounts that legal work could never match. A construction worker might send home $200 a month. A successful dealer sends back $20,000. The visible result is these mansions with 49 ERS logos and Giants insignias. They're not just homes, they're advertisements. They tell everyone in the village, this is what's possible if you go to San Francisco and take the risk. The investigation also revealed something about the barriers to legal work for newly arrived migrants. Getting legal employment requires finding an immigration attorney, which costs money. You need to get a social security number, which takes time and paperwork. You might need to do internships or lower paid work while you establish yourself. All of that requires resources and patience. Selling drugs is immediate. You show up, someone from your village connects you with the operation, and you're making money within days. That's the trap. The illegal route is faster and more lucrative, especially for people who are desperate, who've spent their savings getting to the US, and who need to start sending money home immediately to justify the risk of the journey. So while San Francisco families pay $4,000 a month to live next to this operation, the profits are flowing out of the country entirely, building wealth in rural Honduras that's transforming entire communities. And those communities now have a direct financial incentive to keep sending people to the Tenderloin because the system works. Fentanyl changed everything. Before it became the dominant drug in San Francisco, the overdose numbers were bad. After fentanyl took over the market, they became catastrophic. And the reason is simple. It's powerful, it's cheap, and it's deadly. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that's roughly 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine. That potency means dealers can make massive profits with minimal product. A gram of fentanyl can be cut and distributed into hundreds of doses. It's easy to transport because you need so little of it to meet demand. And on the street, individual doses sell for as low as $5. $5 for something that could kill you on the first use. For dealers, the math is obvious. Higher potency means you can move less weight and make more money. Lower prices mean more customers. And because it's so addictive, those customers keep coming back until they can't anymore. Since 2020, San Francisco has recorded more than 2,200 fatal overdoses. Most of those deaths are concentrated in the Tenderloin. The neighborhood sees 5 to 10 emergency calls for overdoses every single day. That's not an average that includes quiet days. That's the consistent reality. Every morning, every afternoon, every night, someone is overdosing. The post-pandemic spike was particularly brutal. During certain periods, fentanyl overdoses in San Francisco killed more people than COVID-19. The drug didn't just create a health crisis. It reshaped daily life in the Tenderloin. Bodies lying unconscious on sidewalks for hours became a common sight. Residents stopped being shocked by it. That's how normalized it became. One resident described hearing death screams in the morning, the sound of people realizing someone they know has overdosed. Sirens become background noise. You stop noticing them. The 100,000 syringes collected annually by the Department of Public Works are just the ones they find. There are more in bushes, in alleys, in places kids play. The city's response included distributing Narcan, the overdose reversal drug, in record quantities. Nonprofits, community centers, even some businesses keep Narcan kits available. But it's reactive. You can save someone today, and they might overdose again tomorrow. Treatment centers exist, but they have waiting lists that stretch for months. By the time someone gets a bed, they might already be dead. In 2021, Mayor London Breed invested $8.5 million in something called community ambassadors. These are unarmed workers who walk the streets, connect people with services, and try to de-escalate situations. It's a harm reduction approach that prioritizes keeping people alive over enforcement. But critics say it doesn't address the core problem, which is the open-air drug market that supplies the fentanyl in the first place. Keith Humphreys, an expert from Stanford, has pointed out that arrests don't align with what residents actually need. You can arrest a dealer today, and someone else takes their spot tomorrow. The demand for drugs doesn't disappear because of an arrest. The supply doesn't dry up. The cycle just continues with new faces. What residents are living with is constant exposure to death. Parents trying to shield their children from seeing people inject drugs openly on the sidewalk. Workers stepping over unconscious bodies on their way to the bus stop. Business owners who can't keep their entrances clear because people use them as sheltered spots to get high. Medical personnel in the Tenderloin are in a permanent state of emergency. Paramedics respond to the same addresses multiple times a day. Emergency rooms see the same patients repeatedly. Narcan saves lives in the moment, but without treatment and housing and actual support, people end up back on the street using again. The fentanyl crisis isn't just about the deaths, although those are horrific enough. It's about the psychological toll on everyone who lives in the neighborhood. Kids growing up thinking this is normal. Adults becoming desensitized to human suffering because you can't maintain emotional reactions to something you see every single day. And the price point makes it accessible to anyone. $5 is less than a meal. For someone deep in addiction, that's an easy choice. For dealers, it means they can sell to more people and create more dependence. The accessibility is part of what makes fentanyl so devastating. It's not a drug only for people with money. Anyone can afford it. And that's exactly the problem. In 2024, something unusual happened. Residents and hotel owners in the Tenderloin filed a lawsuit against the city of San Francisco. Not for money, but for something simpler: equal treatment. The lawsuit alleged that the city deliberately allows rampant fentanyl use, violence, and tent encampments to concentrate in the Tenderloin, effectively treating it as a containment zone for problems the rest of the city doesn't want to deal with. The term containment zone became central to the case. The argument was that police and city officials respond differently to issues in the Tenderloin than they do in wealthier neighborhoods. Tents get cleared faster in areas near tourist spots. Drug dealing gets shut down more aggressively in places like the Marina or Pacific Heights. But in the Tenderloin, the response is slower, less consistent, and sometimes non-existent. Residents presented evidence showing the difference in police response times and enforcement priorities. The message they got from the city's actions was clear. Your neighborhood is where we let this happen, so it doesn't happen elsewhere. Whether that was official policy or just the practical result of limited resources, the effect was the same. People in the Tenderloin were being sacrificed. The city did take some actions. Mayor London Breed declared a state of emergency in 2021. In 2023, the city created the Drug Market Agency Coordination Center, a multi-agency task force focused specifically on the Tenderloin drug market. That center has generated over 3,000 arrests. Proposition E, passed in 2024, added more police officers and surveillance cameras to the area. The California Highway Patrol and the National Guard were deployed to assist local police. Together, they confiscated 103 kilograms of drugs in 2023. Those are significant numbers, and the city pointed to them as proof of action. But critics said the enforcement was performative, focused on visible areas like UN Plaza, while ignoring blocks where the real volume of dealing happens. Randy Shaw from the Tenderloin Housing Clinic has been vocal about this. He pointed out that police might make a show of arrests in one plaza, but then blocks like 7th and Market have 50 dealers nightly operating with almost no interference. The selective enforcement creates the appearance of action without actually disrupting the market. There's also the political complication. San Francisco's progressive policies include not criminalizing poverty and homelessness. Public defenders actively work to protect undocumented dealers from deportation. There's been discussion of creating a special court specifically for migrant dealers, with the goal of providing fair legal process rather than automatic deportation. Those policies come from a place of wanting to treat people humanely. But the practical result is an environment where the risk of serious consequences is lower. Dealers get arrested, go through the system, and are often back on the street within days or weeks. For people making $350,000 a year, an arrest is just a business expense, not a deterrent. The issue of homeless encampments adds another layer. After 2021, tent populations returned to pre-pandemic levels in parts of the Tenderloin. But the city's approach to clearing them has been inconsistent. Arrests for homelessness-related offenses actually went up, even as visible tent counts went down in some areas, suggesting people were being displaced rather than housed. The spillover effect hit neighboring areas like the Mission and Soma. As services concentrated in the Tenderloin, people experiencing homelessness and addiction migrated to those districts, spreading the problem rather than solving it. Meanwhile, 78 businesses in the Tenderloin closed, specifically because of safety concerns. Owners couldn't keep staff, customers stopped coming. The economic damage compounded the human cost. What the lawsuit exposed was a fundamental question about city priorities. If you deliberately allow certain neighborhoods to absorb problems to protect others, are you governing fairly? Residents in the Tenderloin weren't asking for the problems to be moved. They were asking for the same level of response and resources that wealthier areas receive. The city's investments, like the $8.5 million for community ambassadors and the creation of the coordination center, show awareness of the problem. But without addressing the underlying issues, like housing scarcity, addiction, treatment availability, and economic opportunity, enforcement alone doesn't work. You arrest dealers, new ones appear, you clear tents, they go up again a block away. And the national perception of San Francisco is now defined by images of the Tenderloin. Videos of open-air drug use go viral. News segments show the conditions. For a city that markets itself as progressive and innovative, the Tenderloin has become an embarrassment that undermines that brand. And for residents living there, it's just another way they've been failed. There are 3,500 children living in the Tenderloin. That's not an estimate. That's documented. And those kids represent the highest density of children anywhere in the Bay Area. More kids per block than in family-friendly suburbs. More than in neighborhoods designed for young families. They're growing up in the middle of an open-air drug market. What does that actually mean for a child? It means walking to school past people, injecting drugs on the sidewalk. It means seeing unconscious bodies and learning not to be scared because it happens every day. It means parents trying to explain things no parent should have to explain to a 6-year-old. A housekeeper with 2 kids described her daily reality. Every morning, she sees people using drugs right in front of her, building entrance, sometimes injecting, sometimes smoking. Her kids see it too. There's no way to shield them completely because the activity is constant and everywhere. You can't avoid it. The psychological impact of this environment isn't fully measured because nobody's doing comprehensive studies on these kids. But common sense tells you what's happening. When children are exposed to drug use, violence, and death as a normal part of their environment, it shapes how they understand the world. It affects their sense of safety. It changes their expectations of what adult life looks like. These families are predominantly immigrant communities, Asian, Latino, and Honduran families who came to San Francisco for opportunity and ended up trapped in the only neighborhood they can afford. Many of the parents work in service industries, cleaning hotels, working in restaurants, doing jobs in mid-market or downtown that require them to live nearby. Commuting from outside the city would eat up too much of their income and time. A lot of them live in SROs, those single-room occupancy buildings that were built decades ago. Some SRO units go for $1,400 a month for a single room with a shared bathroom. Others, the ones with private bathrooms or minor renovations, can hit $2,500 to $4,000. For a family, that means everyone in one room. Privacy doesn't exist, but it's what they can afford. The Tenderloin has historically been one of the last neighborhoods in San Francisco where Black and Latino families can afford to live. Gentrification has pushed those communities out of almost every other part of the city. The Mission used to be affordable for working-class Latino families. Now it's boutique coffee shops and tech workers. The Fillmore, historically a Black neighborhood, has been almost completely transformed. The Tenderloin became the last stand. And in the 2010 seconds, even that was under threat. Around 10,000 tech employees moved into the area when companies like Google and Yahoo opened offices nearby. At the time, rents were around $2,000 for studios, which tech workers saw as a bargain. But for existing residents, that influx meant competition for housing and rising prices. There was significant backlash from the community, resistance to what people called tender knob, a gentrified version of the Tenderloin. That gentrification wave didn't fully take hold, partly because the neighborhood's conditions scared off enough newcomers that the market didn't completely flip. But it did create tension and displacement for some families. And then the pandemic hit, tech workers left, and the drug market expanded into the vacuum. So these families, these 3,500 kids, they're stuck. They can't afford to leave. The jobs their parents work require proximity to downtown. And every single day, they navigate an environment that treats their safety as less important than maintaining a containment zone for the city's drug problem. The political shift in the neighborhood reflects that frustration. In recent elections, the Tenderloin swung 22 points to the right. That's not because residents suddenly became conservative. It's because progressive policies that sound good in theory have failed them in practice. When your kid is stepping over syringes on the way to school, arguments about not criminalizing poverty start to feel like excuses for inaction. The coalition that filed the 2024 lawsuit was unusual. It included low-income residents and hotel owners, groups that don't typically align politically. But they shared a common experience of being abandoned by the city. They weren't asking for mass incarceration or deportation. They were asking for clean sidewalks, functional streets, and the same level of city services that other neighborhoods receive. For the kids growing up there, the Tenderloin is all they know. They don't have a comparison point to understand how abnormal their environment is. And that's maybe the saddest part. When a child thinks this is just how cities are, that this is normal, they're being robbed of something fundamental. They're learning that their lives matter less than people in other neighborhoods. That lesson sticks. San Francisco is one of the wealthiest cities in human history. It's home to tech companies worth trillions of dollars. The median household income in the city is over $100,000. And yet, it can't figure out how to clean up 50 blocks. That's the contradiction at the heart of the Tenderloin crisis. It's not a resource problem. The city has money. It's a priority problem. It's a political will problem. And maybe, if the lawsuit is right, it's a deliberate choice problem. The policies that created this situation came from good intentions. Sanctuary city status is meant to protect immigrants from deportation over minor offenses. Harm reduction approaches are meant to keep drug users alive rather than throwing them in jail. Affordable housing protections are meant to prevent displacement of long-term residents. But the combination of those policies, in practice, created an environment where an open-air drug market can operate with minimal consequences. Think about the equation. Dealers making $350,000 a year face arrests that rarely lead to serious prison time. They get released, and if they're deported, they can return within months, because border security isn't stopping determined individuals. Meanwhile, families paying $4,000 a month have no legal recourse to force the city to protect their streets. The dealer has more practical freedom than the family. This isn't sustainable, and it's not compassionate, despite what some policymakers claim. There's nothing compassionate about allowing 3,500 children to grow up surrounded by drug use and death. There's nothing progressive about creating a containment zone where poor families absorb the city's failures so wealthier neighborhoods don't have to. Keith Humphreys from Stanford has pointed out that enforcement alone doesn't work. You need treatment, mandatory if necessary. You need actual housing, not SRO rooms, at market rate prices. You need to distribute services across the city, rather than concentrating them in one neighborhood. But all of that requires political courage that San Francisco hasn't shown. The $8.5 million invested in community ambassadors, the 3,000 arrests, the deployment of the National Guard, none of it addressed the core issue. The demand for drugs exists because addiction is a medical condition that requires treatment. The supply exists because it's profitable and the risks are manageable. Until you address both sides of that equation, you're just managing the problem, not solving it. And then there's the national embarrassment factor. Videos of the Tenderloin go viral regularly. News segments feature it as an example of progressive policy failure. For a city that brands itself as innovative and forward-thinking, the Tenderloin is a constant reminder that tech wealth doesn't translate to functional governance. The political shift in the neighborhood, that 22-point swing, suggests residents are done waiting for progressive solutions that never materialize. They're not necessarily embracing conservative ideology. They're just desperate for anyone who will actually do something. So here's the question nobody wants to answer. Is San Francisco willing to admit that its current approach has failed? Is it willing to implement policies that might be unpopular with activists but necessary for residents? Is it willing to treat the Tenderloin with the same urgency it treats other neighborhoods? Because right now, the city is asking families to pay premium rent to live in a containment zone. It's allowing dealers to make more money than engineers. It's letting children grow up in conditions that would be unacceptable anywhere else. And it's doing all of this while claiming to be a progressive leader. The Tenderloin crisis is a symptom of larger failures. Housing policy that created scarcity, drug policy that doesn't reduce harm or addiction, immigration policy that's exploited by criminal networks, economic policy that creates massive wealth while leaving working families in poverty. San Francisco has the resources to fix this. It has the money, the expertise, the infrastructure. What it lacks is the will to make hard choices. And until that changes, families will keep paying $4,000 a month to live next to people making $350,000 selling the drugs that killed 2,200 people. That's not a housing crisis. That's a moral crisis. And it's one the city built itself.